Excellent lesson by Brother David this morning. We really appreciate the message that he brought, the edification that we were engaged in this morning, not only in the lesson but in our Bible study as well. And I hope that we continue with that during this hour as we continue to worship the Lord. We've already got off to a great start. Appreciate the songs that were led in our hearing. Appreciate the prayer that was led a few moments ago as well. Appreciate you for being out here. I hope that as we go through the lesson tonight, if you're here and you're not a child of God, something is said that will encourage you to make your life right with God before it's too late. We don't have a guarantee of tomorrow. We don't have a guarantee that we'll be finished in the next hour, or that the Lord may come back. We just don't know. And so we hope that you will consider your situation in life. If you're a child of God, it's fallen away. We encourage you, implore you. Hopefully will influence you by the lesson this evening to come back to the Lord and make your life right with the Lord before it's too late. We've been talking about the concept of influence for a while now. For the last several sermons that we've looked at the concept of influence. And the reason why we've been talking about influence is because really and truthfully I believe that the concept of influence, whether we realize it or not, is something that we find ourselves engaged in every day of our lives. We as parents, for instance, influence our children. We as children are being influenced by people around us. We have internal and external influences, in other words, some that are direct, some that may be indirect. A parent wants to influence their child to do the right thing. The manager in the business wants to influence their employees to be the most efficient as they can. The school teacher wants to influence their students so that they learn the material in the class, so that they will get a good grade, so that they will be able to succeed in life. We find ourselves influenced by the things that we read and the things that we see, the things that we listen to throughout our lives, and the people that are around us. And so influence, at least the concept of it, is all around us, and it is something that impacts not only our religious realm, but it's impactful everywhere. As I said, school teacher, business. So in the secular realm, and especially in the religious realm, influence is something that is important for us to think about, because as children of God, as those who are striving to be children of God, we have to be mindful of the influence that we have on others. Whether we're being a positive influence or a negative influence on others. Most importantly, ultimately, that as such, we're using our influence to give God the glory. Everything comes back to God, and we want to make sure that we utilize the influence that we have for the benefit of the kingdom of Christ. And so we want to ensure that we fully understand the concept of influence and what it means. We've looked at some lessons that from a negative standpoint, you might say, from a positive standpoint. We've talked about Solomon as in regards to influence in our viewpoint of it from something of a negative standpoint. That is how people can influence us to go down the wrong path. And we made application with those points that we made in regards to influence as well. And the last Sunday, we looked at, or actually the Sunday before that, we looked at young Timothy as our positive example. We talked about how that he was influential. We looked at his life, we looked at these scriptures that are here behind me actually, and talked about how that he, by taking the influence that the Apostle Paul had upon him in his life, and the encouragement that Paul gave him, and that he was to be an example to the believers and help the people around him to grow, and ultimately, verse 16, to be mindful of himself and mindful of those around him. We talked about those points and made application as to how Timothy was influential and is influential to us today. Now, along the same line of thinking, last Sunday, we talked about how he became this influential person. There's people in our lives that influence us. As I said, our parents, school teacher that you might think about, a peer at work, a good friend, number of friends, number of peers, number of sources out there that influence us, especially people. And I'm sure every one of us know of people in our lives, past or present, who have or are influencing us. And Timothy, being one of those people that we looked at as an influencer, I thought it was good that we would think about how he became such an influencer, because the Lord wants those of us who are his children, as we go about and we let our lives shine before men, that they may see our good works and glorify our Father which is in heaven. In essence, what the Lord is saying is to use our godly influence to give God the glory and bring others into the Lord so they can see just how beneficial and how much joy they can have in life if we turn our backs on sin, we turn our eyes on the Lord. So tonight I want to continue on where we talked last week. We talked about, as I said, how Timothy became an influencer, but I want to make some application tonight on those 4 points. And so we talked about some different points in regards to our lesson on Timothy, this young man, this evangelist, and his influence. The evangelist's influence is what I want to talk about this evening as we go through the lesson this hour. Now, just a real quick review so we know what the points are we're going to talk about tonight. How was Timothy influenced in his life? We talked about 4 main points, and one had to do with reputation. And really, honestly, the more you think about, I believe, the more you think about influence, reputation is probably foundational to the concept of influence. Because if you have a bad reputation, say for instance, if you have a bad reputation for every time you touch a car and you tear it up, nobody's going to want you working on their vehicle. You've got a bad reputation when it comes to that. If you're somebody that is living a life of sin, and you're trying to influence someone to obey the Lord, they're not going to listen to you because your reputation in that realm, in that area, is just destroyed. And so reputation is very important. Timothy had a good reputation. We talked about how the brethren talked well of him, and now that he had his mother, his grandmother, influencing him. And as a result of having people talk well of him, and that encouraged him and motivated him, and hopefully you understand that you're like I am, it motivates me to want to keep a positive reputation. I have a good reputation, and when I do, I want to keep that reputation, because if I don't, my influence is hindered. The second thing we talked about was how he listened to a godly influence. That is his mother and his grandmother. We talked about the two of them most specifically, how that Paul talked about how that this zeal that Timothy has first started with his grandmother, moved on to his mother Lois, and then went on to him. And Paul described it as genuine, a genuine faith. When you see something that is a counterfeit, you can pretty much tell the difference between a counterfeit versus what's genuine. And it's going to take a genuine faith for us to truly build up the reputation of serving the Lord and influencing others and being genuine in the sense that we're willing to put forth the time, the effort, and the resources into studying and growing and applying what we learn in our lives to the Lord. Thirdly, we talked about how that Paul was a mentor to Timothy. So we can certainly say that Timothy's grandmother and Timothy's mother were mentors to him. But other people are mentors to us as well in a positive way. I mentioned the fact that in this room right now, there are people in this room who are influential to me and probably to you as well. I hope so. Especially those who are elders, those who are the deacons, those who are teaching, men like Brother David, Brother Barry, all the men, all the women in this congregation. You're an influence to me. You influence, and we influence each other. We provoke one another unto love and good works. And so the thing is, though, is there are certain people in our lives, perhaps, that we know, people that we look at as perhaps more of a more primary example in our lives, somebody that may stick out in our minds more so than others, perhaps because we interact with them more than others. But we see the good aspects of their character and their behavior, and we see those things and we incorporate them into our life. That helps us to be a better individual. Timothy had the Apostle Paul, who had a good reputation for being someone who endured and one that stood up for the Lord. And so Timothy would understand that when he's listening to Paul, he's listening to someone who certainly has the credentials, if you will, to help him and mold him to be the young man who grew up, who we read about, who was growing up to become this influential person that we read about, or we talked about in our last lesson. Fourthly, we talked about the idea of Timothy not neglecting the gift that was in him. And Paul encouraging Timothy, especially in verses 13 and 14 and 15 of 1 Timothy chapter 4, to give heed to reading, to exhortation, and to doctrine. In other words, if Timothy was going to grow and Timothy was going to become an influencer, he, like you and I, would need to get our noses in the Bible, learn what the Word of God says, and put that to practice in our lives. We touched on that this morning in our Bible study. We talked about the book of Acts being the application to the theory that the gospel teaches us about, putting the things Jesus taught into action. So how could we then put these four things into action for us? How can we take the concepts of reputation, really the concept of listening, but specifically listening to parents, especially for our young folks. Listen to your parents. Why is that important? We'll get into that here in just a little bit. And finding and listening to godly mentors. And fourthly, not neglecting the gift. And that really gets us into the concept of procrastination. Let's talk for a minute here about the first point, though. This idea of reputation. Why is reputation such an important thing? Why am I talking about the concept of having a good reputation or not? Especially for our young folks. Consider this. Someday you're going to grow up and you're going to want to find a job. You're going to want to get married. You're going to want to be somebody that is able to influence your children. You're going to want to marry someone that will help you to raise your children. You're going to be somebody that wants to influence your friends. And the Bible exhorts us to ensure that we surround ourselves with individuals who are like-minded when it comes to that as well. But when you think about your reputation is going to affect those aspects of your life. Now, if you have a reputation for being somebody who is just unruly and you're someone that maybe be someone that wants to just get into a fight with everybody, or you're someone that has a reputation for stealing or a reputation for just whatever kind of sin and disruptive behavior you can think of, chances are you're going to have a hard time finding somebody who is really going to be interested in perhaps being your wife or being your husband. You're going to have a hard time if you get married and then you behave that way, of keeping your marriage intact. And the people in your community is going to know about it. Your family is going to be affected by it, because if you, let's say for instance fathers, if we as fathers, husbands, if we have a reputation for being an alcoholic, we have a reputation for being a drug addict, we have a reputation for stealing from our neighbors, when our children go off to school, they're probably going to find themselves being found as collateral damage because of our actions. People at school may ridicule them or make fun of them or pick on them, have fights with them. Our children could eventually grow up and do those same things. Same thing when it comes to our marriage. Our marriage is going to fall apart. People are going to know that so-and-so is married to so-and-so, and how in the world is she still married to him when he acts this way? And it's just going to trickle down, and you know what's going to happen? Eventually, you may want to try to get yourself a job. You may want to try to do something, and your reputation has been destroyed to the point where nobody just wants anything to do with you. And the thing about a reputation is it just takes a very little bit to destroy all the things you've built up when it comes to your reputation. Notice what the Ecclesiastes writer said in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 1. In Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 1, Solomon said, "Dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment and cause it to give off a foul odor. So does a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor." That's an amazing scripture, in my opinion. It really is profound. Think about what he says here, first of all. Obviously, the concept of dead flies, that's just horrible. I already kind of think of something that's just nasty. Unfortunately, I'll say it, maggots come to mind. But we're talking about dead flies and the concept of putrefying. You ever use that word? You go in somewhere and something just absolutely stinks, it smells horribly. It's putrefying in here, you might say. Well, as Solomon says, you have perfumer's ointment. And a perfume is something that smells good. So you have this perfumer's ointment, but it's no longer smelling good because of something that has tainted it. This, in his example, the dead fly. And it happens, he says, notice who he says it happens to. It's somebody who is respected for wisdom and honor. So this person, to get to that point in your life, is not something that happens right away. That's something that's going to take some time in your life. In order for you to get to the point in your life where people know you as somebody that's respectful, somebody that's wise, somebody that is to be respected, that's going to take some time to build up that kind of reputation. Maybe you know people like that. Maybe you have family members that are like that. Maybe you have people that you work with that are like that. Individuals who you know are, when it comes to various things in life, they have the answers, because of the wisdom and the experience and the knowledge that they have had in their lives. But something happens, maybe they do something in their life, they commit a sin, for instance, maybe like the preacher who commits adultery. They do something. And all the things that they did, all the things that they were known about for their respect, All the things that they had done to earn this respected for wisdom and honor is all overshadowed now. It has become putrefied by that sinful behavior that they had. You remember, I don't know if you know a lot about Bill Cosby. I'd say you probably do. Angie and I have been talking about him a little bit today. We were reminded of him earlier today. We were talking about Bill Cosby. You remember, those of you who are closer to my age, maybe not our young folks, we may remember growing up and listening to Bill Cosby, and he told a lot of stand-up comedy that was very humorous. A lot of people went to his shows. A lot of people really loved his television show, The Cosby Show. He actually had even earned the nickname America's Dad. And so people looked at him and respected him in that regard. But then, a few years ago, it came out the kind of things he was doing behind closed doors, and the horrible things he was doing to women. And he went to prison for that, and destroyed all those years of building up his image, building up his reputation. And that's what happens when we don't think about how our reputation can affect us. You know, Paul, in writing to Timothy, as Paul's writing to Timothy in the first epistle to Timothy, in chapter 3, and verse 7, it's interesting because in chapter 3, Paul starts talking about elders and deacons. And here he is, think about this for a minute. He's writing to a young man, and he's talking to him about the qualifications for these offices, the office of an elder and the office of a deacon. That as Paul writes about these things, he talks about how these are offices that people who are not novice is to desire. In other words, these are individuals who have developed over the years, individuals who have experience under them, individuals who have read their Bibles and they're able to teach the Word of God. But in verse 7, he says to Timothy, in regards to elders, he says that they are to have a good report with those that are without. You know what he's talking about? Reputation. He's talking about reputation. And what he means is not only in the brotherhood does he have a good reputation, but the people out there who are not Christians, they're going to be known by even people that are not Christians that Kitty Fletcher is the kind of man that is given to hospitality. David Thacker is a man who is apt to teach. James Glass is one who rules well in his own household. They're going to know these things. And that reputation is going to be out there. And so why would he tell it to a young man like Timothy? Well, if you want to get to that point in life, it's going to take some time, isn't it? Not a novice. And so young folks, think about now. Don't wait till you're 30 or 40 and then say, well, you know what, I guess it's time to start working on being a deacon. It's time to start working on being an elder. That starts now, in your youth. That starts as you're growing up, because you need to develop those qualities. Every one of us that are Christians needs to develop those qualities, obviously. No reason why any of us shouldn't be apt to teach and shouldn't have a good reputation. But most certainly, if you're a young man and you're a young Christian, don't think that, well, since usually it's somebody that's in their 50s or whatever becomes an elder, then I'm just going to wait till I'm in my 50s to try to get to that point. No. If you want your children to be faithful to the Lord, you need to start while you're young. If you want to be one that's apt to teach, start while you're young. And if you don't, then that reputation that is well received from those that are without, you're not going to have. And that's just one of the qualifications I know, but the point I hope you understand. Our reputation, things that we do, the things that we say, the way that we behave, the people that are around us, our social group, and all those influence us. Timothy surrounded himself with individuals that had his interest at heart. People like Paul, his mother, his grandmother, the brethren, and so forth. So let's now move on to the second point again. He listened to a godly upbringing. Young folks especially, I want you to think about the fact that you here at this congregation, I know, from looking at and getting acquainted with the individuals that are here, you have parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who are interested and concerned about your spiritual well-being. And when they tell you to do things like clean your room or read your Bible, they're doing it for your own good. And so one of the things that we need to understand and think about is we need to listen, we need to practice some good listening skills. Don't just tune out your parents when they're talking to you. And those of us who are older, we can still learn from maybe our older siblings or our older parents and grandparents and so forth. Listen, some of the best managers and leaders out there, one of the characteristics of individuals that are of that type is they have good listening skills. You know, you're never going to learn if you're the one that's always doing the talking and then you're not listening to anybody. And that's what our parents are for. That's what our